Hey everybody, AVC 10 meteorologist Brenden Mincheff here with a drought update. It's been a minute since we've done a drought update, and the drought has really improved since then. We're going to take a look at the numbers. I do want to say that these numbers you see behind me take into account Saturday, March 4th numbers for rainfall, but not anything that's fallen Sunday, March 5th or onwards. So we will add a little bit more to these numbers you see behind me right now. But still, total so far for the month, again, through Saturday, is over a tenth of an inch. Average to date, we're a little bit behind that. So for the month, we are below, but again, there's still a little more to be added in there. But when we take a look at the water year as a whole, started October 1st, 20.92 inches so far downtown Sacramento. The average to date is over 14 inches. That means we are 6.5 inches over, actually 6.75 inches above where we normally are to this point in the water year. The state as a whole, through the water year so far, you see the numbers here. Los Angeles over 16 inches, Santa Barbara almost 19 inches, Fresno over 13 inches, Stockton 17.5 inches. Of course, Sacramento just talked about that, almost 21 inches so far on the water year. South Lake Tahoe almost 30 inches of liquid water equivalent. And when we take a look at the departure from normals there are a lot of blue numbers on the map, and that is really good news. San Diego, Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, Bakersfield, Fresno, Stockton, San Francisco, Sacramento, South Lake Tahoe, Redding, and Eureka are all above the average to date. I do want to point out, though, if you take a look at far northern California, Redding, Eureka, barely above the average to date for the water year. So when we talk about the drought monitor in a few slides, you're going to notice that we're still kind of lagging behind the rest of the state in far northern California. That's because just kind of a trick of how all the storms have come. They've all really come from Sacramento to the south in terms of where all that water has fallen. And we have not seen as much. Of course, we are average, which is good news, but we haven't seen as much in the far northern portions of the state. Talking about downtown Sacramento, I think this is really interesting. The water year to date, of course, there are 210 days left in this water year. 20.93 inches has fallen. The water year last year, 21 to 22, 17 inches fell. That's it. We're already above where we were last year at downtown Sacramento. And we still have over 200 days left in the water year. Of course, we're not really going to see a lot of rain once we get in towards the summer months. So we're not going to add rain every single day of those 210 days remaining, but it just goes to show you more than half of the year is still left there. And we're already above where we were last year. So there you go. Some preliminary 24-hour rainfall totals. Oroville, Lodi, Vacaville, all over half an inch of rain. Elk Grove, over 4/10. Sacramento International Airport, about 4/10 of an inch of rain. Marysville, the Yuba County Airport, about 4/10 of an inch of rain. Downtown Sacramento, again, this was from Saturday morning to Sunday morning. Downtown Sacramento, over 3/10 of an inch of rain. Woodland, about 3/10 of an inch of rain. Stockton, about 3/10. Modesto, less than 2/10 of an inch of rain, although we still see a little bit more rain to come, especially in the San Joaquin Valley. Snowfall numbers, as of this recording, not quite out yet. They're having some issues digging out and actually getting up there to measure how much snow is on the ground and how much has fallen. So don't have those numbers for this update just yet. But we do have the Snowpack numbers, and it is really, really good news. In fact, I was up there in Phillips. That's where the turnoff to Sierra at Tahoe is on US 50. That's where they do one of the official measurements for the Snowpack. And wow, they were really, really happy with the numbers that we're seeing so far. Central Sierra, average to date, 196%. The percent of April 1st average is 175%. Southern Sierra is doing just absolutely incredible. Average to date, 231% of average. The percent of April 1st average is also over 200%. Notice the Northern Sierra, though. Again, numbers really good. They're above where they normally are, right? We're all above 100% here. But when you compare it to the Central Sierra, when you compare that to the Southern Sierra, it is lagging a little bit, which we mentioned before. We're seeing that with the rainfall. We're seeing that with the snowfall as well. Again, we are above average. Good news, not complaining there. But we are seeing more snow in the Central and Southern Sierra than we are in the far Northern Sierra. This is important because a lot of our reservoirs that would benefit from the Northern Sierra snowmelt, well, there's not as much of it up there as there is in the Central and Southern Sierra. Still, though, above average in terms of snowpack. That's some really good news. Statewide, average to date, 190%. The percent of April 1st average, that is 171%. All right, here's the drought monitor. Promised we'd get to it. The map looks really, really good, better than it has been in a very long time for California, even as a whole. No drought at all, nothing at all. 13.71% of the state. That is everywhere you see in that base map color gray. The abnormally dry area, technically not drought. This is either recovering drought or we're going into a drought. But for the most part, with where we have been, this is recovering. That's 34% of the state. So you have almost half of the state here in no drought at all and or recovering from drought there. The moderate drought category, 24%. Same in the severe drought category, about 24%. So half the state still in some form of drought, half the state totally out of drought. The highest level categories, we haven't been in that in a few months now at this point, and that is some good news. But you do notice, again, where most of that drought still lingers is in the desert areas, but also in far northern California, all the way down into the Sacramento Valley. That has to do for a few things. One of those is snowpack. We talked about that. Haven't seen quite as much snow. The other one, I think, has to do with the reservoirs here, because Shasta still is not above the average to date. It is still only 83% of the average to date, which, sure, is a lot better than where it was in, November, December. But there's still a ways to go in Shasta. Oroville is still above that 100% of average to date mark. Capacity is 74%. Folsom, not really a storage reservoir so much as a flood control reservoir, but it also is 114% of the average to date. One of the ones that's really, really hurting, though, is Trinity, also in far northern California. The lake levels here are not very good. It's right here. That's where it is right now. That's where average is. So we would like to see it generally somewhere right here, and it is all the way down here. So when we look at the graph here, that's 48% of the average today, and the capacity of Lake Trinity right now is only a third. It's at 33%. Again, it's very easy to see just how far behind Trinity is. This is one of our big water supply reservoirs. This is a big deal that it is still so low. Now, even though we've seen improvement in the drought, right, state as a whole, we are seeing local improvements. There certainly will be a lot of areas that are not going to have to be feeling any impacts from drought at all, from the Sierra, even in the Central Valley into Southern California. We're setting up for a really good water year. But as for why some of the drought monitors are still lagging behind for Northern California especially, it has a lot to do with the rainfall that, even though it's above average, not as much as what we've seen across other parts of the state. Has to do with some of the snowpack. Again, not as great as some of the other parts of the state, even though it is above average. And then Trinity is a really good example of how much water we still want to see in order to get some of those lakes back to average, and just how long it takes. Even though we had how much rain in January, even some into February to start, we had those storms in December. We're having more right now, and still we have lakes that are not even a third full, or barely a third full in the case of Trinity. It also has to do with groundwater. And let's talk about groundwater for a minute. So this map is showing you the rough placements of the high and medium priority groundwater basins in the state of California. That's all of these in these orange colors. We have some up here in Northern California, a lot in the Central Valley, and then also some down in Southern California. But you do notice most of them, for sure, in the Central Valley. Now, the most critically overdrafted basins are in this red area here, basically in the San Joaquin Valley all the way down towards Bakersfield in Southern California, in the southern portions of the Central Valley. That's where the most critically overdrafted basins are. But we had some good news come out this week. One of those being that the critically overdrafted sub-basin approvals that had to go through the state with a year left. One of them in our area, the Eastern San Joaquin sub-basin, got the green light, got the thumbs up. That means the sustainability proposal put forth by the water managers for the Eastern San Joaquin sub-basin, it is approved. It's good to go plan. That means we will get to a point for the Eastern San Joaquin Valley, as well as the 5 other ones listed here. We will get to a point where that groundwater will become sustainable. We won't be taking out more than what we're putting in, and we hopefully will start to see some of that subsidence come to an end there. But again, that is some good news when it comes to groundwater. So we always try to show some positive news as well. We always do that with the rain and the snowfall numbers that we're seeing, but also some of the long-term projects like groundwater basins finally got a green light there, again, with a year to spare. There's some that still need a lot of work and some that did not meet the criteria, but again, they do have 1 year left to do that. Taking a look ahead at the next 8 to 14 days for the climate outlook, will very likely be cooler across all of the West Coast. And then in addition to that, will likely be wetter as well. This is for March 12th through 18th, the period there. We could have some atmospheric river storms coming back into the forecast. I know this has gotten a lot of talk on social media and amongst water managers recently with the warm storms. I want to say I asked the question directly, personally asked the person that was measuring snow with DWR, Mr. Sean de Guzman, he said these warmer storms in this time of year, in the kind of early to middle March, it's okay. We will see some impacts, especially in the lower elevations where we've had that low elevation snow as for that rapid snow melt. But because of how cold the snowpack is, because of how big our snowpack is, even if we get some of these warmer rainstorms in the high elevations, it's not going to create too big of a flooding risk. It's not really going to be too much of a problem. We're not going to lose too much snowpack because it is so cold right now and there's just so much snow up there. So that's gotten a lot of talk right now. I want to break this down just a little bit. One of the storms you can see, this is from the European model for the 15-day atmospheric river probabilities. The European model here, if you see one storm, you see a kind of poorly defined second storm here, and maybe a third one off on the horizon. Now, this orange line is where the Sacramento and Stockton latitude is, about 38 degrees north. And so you can see we would be impacted by the first one, we'd be impacted by the second one, and potentially the third one as well. There's not great model agreement on this. Both the global models, the European and the American GFS model, if we're going to get nerdy for a second, both of these models do show some atmospheric river linked storms over the next 15, 16 days or so. The timing of them differs, the intensity of them differs, but generally this is what we're looking at. We do have that potential for one, possibly two or three of these warm storms. So this is kind of a pattern shift. We've had these cold, wet periods. Now we're moving into more of a warm, wet period. And again, that is something we'll be watching for, especially as it relates to flooding in the foothills as we get some of that rapid snow melt. But based on what I was told by the Department of Water Resources, it's more of a problem when these warm storms happen in April, middle of April, May, and then obviously later than that if we were to get them. So the first storm, this is also the European model, that first storm that we saw, this is Friday, March 10th. You can see that connection there with the atmospheric river bringing a lot of rain in towards California. You can see the second one out there. Now, this is a Tuesday, March 14th. It's on its way here, and then you can potentially see maybe some more linked up after that. Still quite a ways to go. Lots of time for data to change, but there are a lot of rain icons in the next 10 days. Lots of opportunity for rain, lots of opportunity for some more snow as well. That's the drought breakdown. Things are looking much, much better than where we were certainly in December, even where we were a month ago at the start of February. Things have really significantly improved. One of the things I want to talk about is the previous drought update that we did a few weeks ago was related to the Colorado River. And we talked a lot about the Colorado and why it's so important. Well, here at ABC 10, myself and some other people, we got together, we brainstormed, and we talked to some other meteorologists from across the West, from 9 News in Denver, our sister station there, our sister station in Phoenix, Arizona, 12 News, and also someone from our sister station in Southern California, CBS 8 in San Diego. We got them all together. We all got on a call together, and we talked about drought. Now, I'm not going to show you the whole video here. You can find the link to that in the description below, but I do want to show you some highlights from that if you are interested to go watch it. It's a little bit of a long video, long conversation, but man, it was really, really interesting. I hope you find it as interesting as I did. Water and drought, two things that we say kind of hand in hand in the West all the time. But one thing I've heard from all the 4 of you is wildfire, and that wildfire is becoming more of a problem as trees and other vegetation dry out and stay dry. So let's stick with Monica here. Starting in Northern California, how have you noticed drought influencing wildfire behavior?
Well, we had seen for years with climate change some of the forecast models showing the migration of wildfire behavior and mega fires starting to move northward. So drought is going to amplify that risk with tree mortality and also higher evaporation rates. And that brings me to the single most important variable for wildfire risk, and that is vapor pressure deficit, or VPD. There's a lot of research going into that right now, and it's basically the thirst of the atmosphere. So when you think of drought, you think of thirst. And so what VPD is it shows how much the atmosphere is drawing moisture out of things like soil, plants, and trees, making us more vulnerable to that explosive growth. And now what I find really fascinating is how much research is also going into mitigation strategies, even returning to some native ways to combat wildfire behavior. One thing that I love that the recent government just passed in their budget was some funding to bring back the beaver. There's actually a campaign that is bring back the beaver. And the reason why that species, and it's called a species that if it didn't exist, it would actually destroy the whole ecosystem. They dam the water, and so that helps to put the water to percolate underground. The grass around it actually acts like speed bumps so that fire has a tougher time getting through. So returning to some of those native ways and finding ways to combat what is already here is basically how we're moving forward.
Now, do you think, Carlene, maybe this applies in any way to Southern California as well? Maybe not necessarily the beaver, but wildfire obviously not unique to Northern California.
No, not at all. But for us, it's just more of an emphasis, just being alert and ready. That's what we've seen more of a push towards here in Southern California, because as mentioned, you're dealing with climate change. We are dealing with drought conditions, prolonged periods of not seeing any rainfall. Well, prior to this year, it's been a pretty solid start when we're talking about our rainy season. It had such a prolonged period of dealing with extreme drought conditions, and then you have these long spells where you have dry weather, and so a lot of that vegetation's out. And for us here, it's a matter of Santa Ana winds, and so that was a phenomenon that people were primarily talking about in September and October. You're dealing with it as more of a year-round phenomenon when we're talking about our drought conditions. And so for us, we've seen like just more little fires popping up, and because of that, just the alertness and the readiness of Cal Fire and just our local fire departments just being on it, because one little spark leading to rapid growth. We have seen it so much recently here, even in San Diego County and in Southern California. But the thing that I like most about it is the fact that people are now taking it a little bit more seriously when you're talking about defensible space around your home. Also, just the fact that we have had an uptick with the frequency because of prolonged dry periods. But something else that now that we're kind of seeing with the recent rainfall, excessive rainfall that we've had, especially here in California, is because we prolong dry periods when dealing with wildfire conditions and drought conditions, that unfortunately that has also led to a lot of debris flow. And so that's also side of it, is we have these areas that are now burn scar areas that have been out of rain. So it's like if it wasn't one issue with dealing with the drought, it's now another when you're dealing with the fact that we're now seeing a lot of rain and not so much in improvements when it comes to those conditions. But that's another hazard that we are starting to see, especially San Bernardino County mountains, when we started to get a lot of atmospheric river events recently came in, and then we all had debris flow, unfortunately, leading to life and also
and these issues not unique to California. Maybe some of the debris flow
Correct.
things, certain winds, but Corey, you've had not only just more recent wildfires, but also a lot of wintertime or off-season fires, one might call them.
Yeah, Colorado has always kind of been one of the Western states that has more of a traditional wildfire season in the summer. But now we are kind of starting to join in with some of the other Western states where really a wildfire could be cropping up at any moment of the year and would surprise no one. And I think we have seen the greatest increase in fire activity from October to December. And so we got a pretty big wake-up call in Colorado in December 30th, 2021, when the Marshall Fire developed right in basically the heart of the Denver metro, just in the outskirts of the Denver metro area. And I call it a wake-up call because a lot of different things. For one, it showed a lot of the Front Range population here in Colorado that a wildfire is possible at any time of year, even in the heart of winter, December 30th. And it also showed our Front Range population that wildfires are not just forest fires. And they're not just in the WUI either, the wildland urban interface. They can affect everyone, even if you're living in the metro area or the eastern plains of Colorado. wildfire is now an issue for everybody. And so that is a big wake up call. And what's interesting about it is that it also kind of correlated the data, some of the data, that Monica was talking about, just evaporation rates and vapor pressure deficit, things that are getting tossed around in the local news and in public conversations now. They actually saw the correlation directly from we had the driest 6 month period in Denver history was the 6 months leading up to the Marshall Fire, and everybody kind of was sitting on pins and needles thinking that it was going to be in the foothills in the wildland urban interface, and it ended up being right in the Denver metro area. So it was a wake up call for us all in a lot of different ways, and at least people are getting that correlation now, I think.
And Will, you're not going to tell me anything different in Arizona, right? Kind of same story.
We used to depend on monsoon rains to kind of put an end to fires, but unfortunately, monsoon rains are now unpredictable, and we're now seeing wildfires that are drastically more intense than they have been in the past, and in areas usually haven't been. I can remember, I've been at 12 for 12 years now, and I can remember most of the fires happening in north and northeast Arizona. Now, though, it's pretty common to be getting wildfires that are just as intense in the desert areas. We don't usually have that. And when you're talking about intensity of fires, it's 118 degrees in the desert in the summer in Arizona, and it's, 80 degrees in northern Arizona. That heat was much worse, especially when everything is so dry and everything is combustible combustible with incredible intensity. So we were getting many, many more fires than we used to, more intense fires. Really, we're not getting a break from them.
And when we talk, switching gears a little bit here, but when we talk about drought, I don't know if this is the same for a lot of you, but one of the complaints I hear a lot about is agriculture. And they're using too much water, or they're letting too much of it go. Likewise, there's some pretty intensive crops here in Northern California, correct, Monica? The almond orchards, one of them that come to mind.
Yeah, okay, we got to put it into perspective, though. I have to say, because California produces a third of the nation's vegetables and 2/3 of the nation's fruits and nuts. So 80 to 90% of the water that we use is actually on our plate. Now, if we were to mix in dairy into that equation, a cow that is producing milk will consume about 30 to 50 gallons of water a day. However, dairy has actually reduced their water use by about 88% in the last 50 years. So one drop of water on a dairy farm will be used 4 times before it's put out to irrigation on that farm, which actually produces feed for the cows. And another adaptation strategy that we've been seeing more of, especially throughout Northern California, they've got one over at UC Davis, is greenhouses. So they're trying to figure out, with drought being a consistent and a persistent pattern for California as we move into a drier, warmer world, the greenhouses protect us from evaporation. And so it's really critical for sustainability to find alternative methods for growing.
Colorado as well. Corey, earlier you said 85% of river diversions in Colorado used for agriculture.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge, just the farming and the ranching. And it is hurting our farmers. And I find that there's kind of a disconnect between our urban population and the understanding of what is happening on our farming and ranching communities. Because one of the things, and this is most likely common throughout the West, but our farmers, our ranchers, they don't complain a lot. You don't hear a lot of turmoil and drama coming from these communities. So there's a little bit of a disconnect from the understanding of how the urban population, the majority of our viewers, really comprehend the drought on the Eastern Plains. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, the louder victim gets the aid. And so it's been our job, my job also, to kind of bring the stories of the Eastern Plains and the other farming communities on the Western Slope and the San Luis Valley to the viewers that are kind of caught in their own little world and try to open their minds to what's happening in the farming communities. And one of the things that kind of sticks out in my mind that was a little surprising to me was a recent story actually during a blizzard out here in December where I connected with the Colorado State University Agriculture Extension. And the hopes is that, some of the snow from this year will help with the soil moisture. But the soil moisture, they were telling me that over the last 2 years, the soil, the precipitation has not even penetrated below 4 inches of our soil. And so it's really giving us a big lesson in those evaporation rates. And, we don't have to be a farming expert to know that those plants have to go a little deeper than that. And so that has been hurting the yield, and that has been really hurting the crop mortality even.
So as we move deeper into the 21st century, it's obvious that we're already seeing effects of drought, that we're already seeing effects of climate change. And with a booming population in really all of our states here in the Southwest, we're really going to need to think even more carefully about how we use and manage water. So, Will, I'm going to go back to you. The state of water in Arizona, it's not really in a good space right now. What are some of the most immediate problems facing people in Arizona and their water supply?
I think the biggest with Arizona's water right now is that we just can't get enough water to fill reservoirs that we have to fill, not that we want to fill. Lake Powell and Lake Mead. Lake Powell is a very large, actually has more coastline than the entire west coast of the United States. It's just a very, very full canyon. So you have all these little coastlines of the canyon, but it's not as full as it used to be by any means. It's getting toward a level that's called minimum power pool. What that means is that the water is too low to go through the dam and generate electric power. Because if it gets too low, water gets the generators and then they break. You can't do that. We are very close to that happening. Within the next 3 years, it's predicted to happen without something changing. The real scary part of this whole is that if it gets below that line and going, it'll approach what's called dead pool. And dead pool is the lowest possible that the water can still go through the dam. It drops below that point, basically the Grand Canyon goes dry.
And I'll go ahead and I'll say that these upstream problems, that we're seeing in states like Utah, Nevada, and Arizona, they carry downstream. Carlene, what are some of these problems right now? And I will add that California has the senior water rights to the Colorado. So why is the Colorado a problem?
Well, for us, they're like even just last year. So basically, they implemented watering restrictions. And so about 6 million people in Southern California who rely on that water basically were told that, yeah, you have to implement these restrictions, especially with drought conditions that were worsening. And so for us, it was more of a push towards conservation. And so we don't necessarily want to be so reliant when it does come to the Colorado River because of being told that restrictions. So basically about 5% of requested supplies were reduced. So basically deliveries reduced 5% of requested supplies from that water source. And so for us here in Southern California and what we're trying to do is the biggest push is conservation. So if that does happen, as you mentioned, we do have seniority with that. Just the fact that they want people to be smart about it and be wise about it. We have different orders that are popping up even here in San Diego County where you have water projects. So they give rebates and incentives telling people when to use water, when not to use water, trying away from traditional gardening and all those things that in the use water and a push towards a more sustainable lifestyle. And so that's been a huge push here so that we're not reliant on that water source. And then even trying to implement our own various water sources here in San Diego County, to be more specific, so that we're just relying on ourselves because we have such a massive county. And so that's been the push over the past couple of years.
And moving up into Northern California, Monica, we don't take any water from the Colorado up here, but we still have our own water issues. I mean, of course, we do send water down to Southern California, but there's also been questions that we've even had in the newsroom. Are some of these reservoirs big enough. So what does the future look like for Northern California water?
Well, just to put it into perspective, too, 75% of the rain falls north of Sacramento. 75% of the usage is south of Sacramento. So the state has built this delivery and storage system to not only store water above ground in reservoirs, but then a way to send it south for folks that need it there. So do we need more reservoirs? Well, the real answer to that is we built the reservoirs in the prime location. So you can build more, but how are you going to fill it? Especially looking at successive years of drought. Now, that is not true for groundwater. And really, that's what people are saying is our moonshot. It's already built. It's the water that is beneath our feet. It's an existing storage space. And as I mentioned earlier, the state just released that many water districts have already submitted their plans. Some of them got approved, some of them were sent back. They need to do some fine tuning, but a plan's in place to get that sustainable. It's called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and that was enacted in our last drought, and that happened with Governor Brown. So hopefully that's where we're headed here for sustainable water.
And Corey, the state of Colorado might be a little bit of an outlier here. You're not very dependent on the Colorado, at least most of the state is not, but water still hard to come by in some areas.
Yeah, the state of Colorado only uses 40% of our water supply actually comes from the Colorado River. We are also the headwaters to the Rio Grande, the Arkansas, and also the South Platte River. So it kind of seems to some like maybe we have a lot of sources for water, but the truth is those other river basins are seeing a similar fate to the Colorado, maybe not as extreme, but it is getting there. So those shortages are hurting the state of Colorado, maybe on a smaller scale, you might say. One of the deepest drought issues in our state is in southwest Colorado. And we're looking at the San Miguel River, the Dolores River, the Animas, and the San Juan. And those river basins, those eventually end up in Lake Powell, so they also have downstream issues. But what the big problem there in southwest Colorado is those small river basins are starting to dry up, and that is hurting McPhee Reservoir. And so that reservoir hit its lowest elevation last year in its history since it was filled in the mid 1980s. And so we're seeing some trouble on one side. We have the small town of Dove Creek, which is almost practically run out of water 2 years in a row. And that has to do with the amount of water that has been chosen to get released from McPhee Reservoir. I went out there last summer and I literally stood in the middle of the Dolores River, and it was bone dry from the reservoir all the way to the town of Dove Creek. So that's a major issue. And then on the other side of the reservoir, you have the Ute Mountain Ute Indian Tribal Farm, which is it's really an impressive farming operation. And they have very junior water rights, in 1987 rights. And so when McPhee Reservoir has a shortage, they are the first to get cut, and they get cut the most. And so last year they had a 75% cut, and then the year before that they had a 90% water cut. So that tribal farm is really having a hard time keeping crops in rotation and keeping employees, which it's a fairly big farming operation, and they employ a lot of tribal community members. So those are the type of kind of a smaller scale issues that Colorado is having, but they are there for us.
So let me ask you, about 90 seconds here. What can the state of Colorado do? So what can be done going forward?
Yeah, the state of Colorado is really asking us to start living within our means. And what they mean by that is that we have to learn how to not go to the bank and take water out of the reservoir and hope that someday that water will be replaced. We have to kind of live on a forecast, a stream flow forecast that is minimum and reasonable, and learn how to live by that. And how they are asking us to do that is by education and conservation efforts. The state of Colorado challenged the citizens last year in 2022 to find 22 ways to save 22 gallons a day. And if everybody in the state of Colorado was just able to do that, then we would save 48 billion gallons of water in 1 year. And that's just at the municipality level. So other solutions are on the agricultural level as well. It's so big in our state. Things like regenerative farming to restore the shortgrass prairie. A healthy prairie means the water is stored, and the healthier soil is more efficient with crops. And then the other thing is really genetics. Colorado State University Ag Extension is leading the way on a lot of genetic engineering to get a better strain of crop that is more drought resistant. And so those are all solutions, and it's, like we always say, there's not a silver bullet, but all these things add up.
At William Pitts, the same kind of question to you. What can be done? There's a lot of challenges, not a lot of time.
We have conservation, and that's where a lot of people to realize we are going. One good thing about it is that we have a large portfolio of water sources. We have rivers that are state related to the Colorado River, and that provides next metro areas. Point, we're in danger of turning the tap on and nothing happening. But we are in a dangerous spot when it comes to the river, dangerous spot when it comes to our other, which is groundwater. We're actually, some might say, overusing our groundwater. There are parts of the state that are supposed to have groundwater for the next 100 years. Well, now we're finding that all of that water for the next 100 years is spoken for, which means any development that happens cannot rely on groundwater. And that's something that people never thought would happen. The 100-year groundwater rule is taken as gospel in Arizona. So what's going to have to happen from here on out is we're going to have to start finding other sources. We're going to have to start finding other ways to grow that doesn't rely on these traditional sources that we're used to. And we're going to have to conserve in ways that a lot of people never thought we would have to. We're going to have to start watching pools, perhaps. We might have to watch golf courses. We might have to recycle a lot more water than we thought. But something's going to have to happen for us to use less water than we have been.
Carlene, kind of likewise, not a lot of time to kind of figure something out. How do we future-proof Southern California water, and is desalination an answer?
Well, it seems to be here in San Diego. I'll definitely tell you that. We try to get away from a reliance on a river, and specifically in San Diego County, we embrace drought-proof methods and try to break away from that. So we use groundwater, we use water recycling. We have 24 reservoirs with a combined capacity of 100,000 acre feet. So it's definitely been a good thing, but other methods we have, as the seawater desalination, that's a huge thing here in San Diego County. And we're in the forefront of that across the nation. So you're talking about perspective. It supplies 50 million gallons of drinking water a day to San Diego region. So we're talking about our massive county. And as I mentioned, we are leading the nation, and this is a drought-proof method. So we can reduce our reliance on basically Colorado River and just basically pulling from the water, pulling from the ocean. And so we were trying to look at methods that were drought-proof, so we wouldn't have to rely on natural disasters, regulatory restrictions with this. And so what it does is it takes the saltwater fin, and you're talking about 100 million gallons a day to produce 50 million gallons of drinking water. And that is our main source here about desalination, basically taking that salt water, making it into drinkable water through reverse osmosis. And so that started back in 2012, 2015. It's a 3-hour process to have 100 million gallons of salt water converted into 50 million gallons of water for us here in San Diego County.
And Carlene, we talk about making, future proofing, right? And desalination is an answer down there. Monica Woods in Northern California, again, don't rely on the Colorado, but what can we do up here to help the entire state, both north and south, be a little less reliant on the river?
Well, since all the reservoirs are up here, we have to figure out how to save, store, and spread that water much more efficiently. And I love how the Public Policy Institute of California broke it down. Basically, they said urban areas are doing pretty well with the reductions. Once we get into agriculture, they're working on solutions and they're working really hard on it. So they're not oblivious to the fact that there's less water right now. Disadvantaged communities have solutions, but the problem is we haven't put the plan into place to help disadvantaged communities get better water access. And where we have a total failing grade is the environment. It's in the greatest need of better solution. That includes fish, wildlife, and forest health. And just to go back to the original point, it's like even bringing back something like the keystone species of a beaver. When you do something where you get rid of that keystone species, the entire environment around it starts to crumble. We're now recognizing that we have to protect some of those species because of the unintended consequences of not providing for the environment means potentially less surface water for us all.
All right, Monica. So thank you for that. Thank you, everybody. These are kind of the closing arguments, the final thoughts. 60 seconds for each person. Monica, we'll start with you. Anything you want to add, say, expand upon as it relates to drought?
I would just say you really hit on it that agriculture gets such a pushback on how much water they use. But going back to the 80 to 90% of the water that we use is actually on our plate. California feeds the nation and feeds the world. And so being able to balance water rights, which thank goodness I'm not in that business because I think people would rather have you steal their money than their water rights. That it's really going to come down to getting more creative with solutions, using better technology, and a great research environment here in California to find ways to better manage our water.
Mr. Corey Reppenhagen, same to you.
Yeah, it's a stressful time to be a water manager. So many difficult decisions are being made, and they are only going to get tougher as these drought issues continue on. And even with years like this, where from Western Colorado all the way to Tahoe, it's been a good precipitation, a good water year so far. But the thing that we always have to drive home is that we see one of these once every 6-7 years. The deficit continues to grow no matter how much precipitation you get in a single year. So education, conservation, I feel like we're all in this together. These water issues have trickle down effects across our own states, and then from the headwaters all the way down across our neighboring states. I really feel like we have to be in this together and criticize, yes, the way that the decisions are being made. That's how we get better decisions, but we also have to understand where the decisions are being made. So I think that's important. And these discussions like we're having now is just one of those ways to do that.
William, your thoughts?
Is the ultimate collective bargaining situation. I actually went to Colorado a year ago and I was told that a good winter like we're having right 150% when it comes to back is great, but we need 7 to 10 more of that in order to even start getting ourselves out where we are. So this is something that's going to have to be discussed between all of these states, because what happens in Colorado affects me in Arizona. Arizona affects California and Utah, New Mexico, and even parts of Mexico. This is the ultimate situation. We'll have together to find a way to not only conserve more water, but find more sources of water and also figure out how we're going to divide up the water that we have for us to continue living the life we have in the West.
And Carlene, finally you.
I would say just education, understanding, conservation. As mentioned, it's been pretty good. It's been pretty good for this year, but there's still a bigger problem and a bigger issue at hand. And so things could change quickly. And so people need to start thinking about that, and they need to start conservation. We're talking about methods that are being implemented here and pushed here in Southern California of just sustainable gardens, crops. Also talking about just having on one source, and we try to stay away from that here in San Diego County. We have 5 water sources also rely on, and as mentioned, we were talking about just creativity. Now we have a source that is literally the ocean water out and then turning it into drinking water. We're now actually looking at methods of water where the river that we are using for some of the landscapes and crops across Southern California, but now trying to actually do water purification to make that drinkable water as well. So it's just having a better understanding that just because you might have a year or a good solid start to it doesn't mean that it's going to end up like long runs. So just in the back of the mind, being understanding of the situation and knowing that we, like Corey said, we are all there and really need to start implementing these conservation methods and start thinking about this stuff in the long term.
All right, Monica Woods with ABC 10 in Sacramento, Corey Reppenhagen, 9 News in Denver, William Pitts, 12 News in Phoenix, and Carlene Chavis with our sister station, CBS 8 in San Diego. Thank you all for joining us tonight. It's a perfect way to leave it at that. Thank you all at home for watching. Obviously, an evolving situation that is going to see a lot more reporting from all of these wonderful people right here.